so get with it. Marcia, would you just please?
Now, she's been sick.
I like how that's the first thing that people see on the live stream. We'll put that up.
Thanks, John.
Sure thing. Hey, Julie, you can shut it down today?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm going to go have lunch with Claire.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Good, thank you.
Have a happy birthday.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, we got a good group this morning. Okay, let's look at our thoughts and prayers. Eric Chapman is requesting prayers for his sister, Deborah LaMelle. Nancy Giles requesting prayers for her brother, who is in ICU with COVID, and her sister-in-law, who also has COVID. Clayton Dodd requests prayers for her neighbor, Carol, who is facing several health challenges and medical tests. Angela Smith requesting prayers for Sheila Thompson, who has cancer. Sarah Fallis is requesting prayers for Sandra Bryant, who is in the hospital.
And Sandra has come home, and
Okay,
she's doing rather well, so we'll.
Okay, she has COVID and the flu.
Yes.
That's not a good combination, is it? Phyllis Clay requesting prayers for the family of 39-year-old J.W. Sharp, who passed away from a congenital heart condition and leaves behind a wife and 3 young children. Pam Ritchie is making slow progress with her knee surgery. Recovering from surgery is Janie Balch. Undergoing chemotherapy and radiation is Sarah Fallis' friend, Kathy Newhouse.
Yes, and Kathy's still not doing well.
She's not.
Yeah, we got another text that she's really struggling.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, we certainly remember her in our prayers. Jack Pasednik's friend, Corbin Henderson, who is undergoing intensive treatment.
And Jack's birthday is today. He's 14.
His birthday's today.
We want to continue to remember, that's how it's listed on this paper, all the ones who have illness and different difficulties and hard times, and we want to pray for them and hope that they will regain their health. Happy birthday, Ralph Schilling will turn 98 on October 30th. An abundance of birthday cards would make his birthday even more special. Please mail cards, and it has his address here on this paper, and that would be nice if we do that. Coming up, we're going to have what is being called Friends Day, Sunday, October 31st. There will be Bible classes for all ages at 9 a.m., worship at 10, a soup potluck in the pavilion after morning worship, and a short devotional after lunch. There will not be a 5 p.m. worship service on Sunday, 10/31. All right, singing, we have Jean back today. We're happy to have Jean. And she will be leading our singing. I will be saying our prayer this morning at the proper time. Marcia has been ill, very ill, and she's much better, but she's still dealing with it. You know how that is. Yes?
I would really appreciate if you would continue prayers for Carol Bettis. She has 2 more chemo sessions, and then they will do the evaluation.
Okay. Did everyone hear that?
No.
Carol Pettis is taking chemotherapy, and is she doing as well as you expect her to
She's
do?
doing great for the circumstances.
Good.
My sister says she's just
remember her. Carol Pettis. Okay, Marcia does have something to talk to us about, but you're probably going to do that after class, right?
What about you mean about quilting? Yes, after lunch.
Okay, she wants to talk to us about quilting. Okay, let's bow our heads, and I'm going to, while I'm up here, going to go ahead and say the prayer, but then Jeannie's going to do the singing. Our Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day and our opportunity to be here today. Help us to learn everything we can about your word, and so we can share it with others. We want to thank you for so much that you do for us and give to us. We're so blessed to have a Heavenly Father who is as gracious as you are. We know that we sin, and we know that we have to be careful every day about our actions and our words. We would ask you to bless this congregation, bless our ministers that work with us, especially John, and our elders who are doing a great job to take care of us. We want to be thinking about all of the people that are listed on this list that need our support in this way. Maybe there's not something we can do, but just knowing that we have them in our hearts and are praying to you will help the family or the person at the time. We want to pray for Pam and her family with the accident her son had, and we're praying that he will be okay and be back to his normal self real soon. With all of these things, we will ask you to please forgive us, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay.
Number 620, 620. Teach me thy way. We'll sing verses 1, 3, and 4. Teach me thy way.
Jean back, although we had a good substitute too while she was on her trip, and apparently had a really good trip and would have stayed longer, but it started raining. So can't see a lot when it's the weather is bad. We're in Hebrews chapter 5 today, and I'm hoping we can get to near the end of that chapter because there are some things I would like for us to discuss when we get there. And so we'll look at this. This actually, I have more on this. This is the start of what I was going to bring last time and forgot about. Left the jump drive at home, had everything set up, and oops, I didn't have that to put in. But I wanted to just, this is the chalice type thing that they were putting the communion in and marching down 6th Avenue in New York. I just wanted y'all to see what it looked like. And it was gold. Jean, you weren't here, so you don't know all here. But I had read an article in the Wall Street Journal about marching Christ down 6th Avenue in New York. And this is what they were doing. And I just wanted y'all to see what that looked like. And then we talked about the garment of the high priest. And I couldn't decide on which of these I liked best. I think the one over on the far right. But just showing the splendor of the high priest's garment, you know, that was just an amazing thing. And those jewels on there, and like I said, in the sunlight, it would just, sparkle and shine, and all of the things that the high priest was to wear. And we discussed a lot about that last time in regard to the fact that when the high priest went in on the Day of Atonement, though, when he went into the most holy place, he just wore the basic priestly garments, just the basic priestly garments. But when he came out and took off those garments, washed himself, and came and appeared to the people, he had this on, which tells us something about the sacrifice of Jesus, that he suffered as a man. He suffered as man. He offered his sacrifice as man. But when he comes again, you see, and that also qualified him to be high priest, to be able to offer himself and to offer that sacrifice. So we touched on that a little bit. I'm just going to leave that up there for a little while we read parts of chapter 5, where it's interesting, though, to me in Hebrews how he starts out on something really exciting, and then he stops and says, but wait a minute, you don't need to go astray. Make sure you're holding on and all like this. And then he'll go again and say something, and we're just like hanging on the edge. And then he says, but make sure you enter that rest. And then he goes on again, and he introduces the high priesthood of Christ. And then he's going to say, but make sure, there's going to be a warning about apostasy at the end of this chapter and in the beginning of chapter 6. So we won't really get into a detailed discussion of the high priesthood of Christ until we get to chapter 7. But at any rate, he introduces that again here. For every high priest taken from among men. And you see, he's bouncing off of chapter 4, verse 14, where he says, we have a great high priest who can sympathize with us and so forth, but who is without sin, and therefore we can come boldly to the throne of grace. And then he goes on to talk about those high priests that were taken from among men. Then these were different. These were different for men in things pertaining to God. So the priest worked in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sin. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he is required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifices for sins. And no man takes this honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." And he says in another place, "You are high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." I'm going to stop right there, and then we'll pick up the rest of this. But I just have here the high priesthood of Christ. And one of the first things here, and you have all of these things listed there on your the handout, and I just have the main points here. But the high priest and his function in things pertaining to God. That was what the priest did. And you know, when you think of all world religions have some form of a priesthood. Who would have thought of a priesthood if they've just been left alone out there, you know? Is that something, and again, sacrifice, is that something that man would have come up on his own? Probably not. And a priesthood? Probably not. And that they're always saying, you know, and I read a lot of this stuff, and one of the reasons I read this is because I've got 2 kids that are reading some of this stuff, okay? And in fact, all of these, like, evidences about, the creation and so on like that. When Tanya was about 3, she started asking about dinosaurs or something. She may have been 2, I don't know, but just a little time, because she read so early. And she would ask about those things. Well, I was going to know about them because I wanted to make sure she knew. So I read a lot of that stuff. And even now, with some of these things out here about world religions and all, I know they're bumping into people who believe in those things and all like that. But there's a lot of stuff that will say, well, Judaism borrowed from these pagan religions. No. The pagan religions borrowed from the original one God religion. Priesthood and sacrifice, those things, the sacrifice was offered in the garden and then continued to be offered for sin throughout history. It didn't just start with the Jewish people. But in the high priest functioning in things pertaining to God, and I have just a note there, the difference between the prophet and the priest. The prophet spoke for God to the people. The priest spoke for the people to God. So the priest was offering up, and he offered up the sacrifices for them. And in that patriarchal time, you had the fathers were the priests. The fathers were the ones who offered the sacrifices. The fathers were the ones who were the intermediaries. In the Mosaic, then you have God set aside in Exodus 28, he set aside the tribe of Levi and the family of Aaron to serve as priest and high priest. And the tribes of Levi, when they settled in the land, the priests of Levi didn't have an inheritance of this is my spot. They were scattered throughout the land to help the people and to teach the people and so on. But Aaron and his sons would be then the high priest. And then, of course, under the Christian time, we have Jesus as our high priest, but what about all of us? Are we priests? Mm-hmm. We can go to God for us, but just as we did in prayer, didn't we go to God in behalf of others? And so we're all priests. And that just blows the mind of some people. We're also all saints, and that blows some other minds, you know. In fact, there's one preacher down in San Antonio, and we get his bulletin, and in fact the congregation helps us some in this ministry. And every time he sends out the bulletin, he says, "Hello, saints," you know, and that can be scary to some people. But yes, that's who we are. We are priests and we are saints. So we can go to God, just like the Hebrew writer says here in chapter 4, verse 16. We can come boldly. Now, I think I made this point then. That doesn't mean you bebop in there, hello, Daddy. How are things going up there? No. But we can come with confidence. I think that's more what that word means. We can come with confidence, knowing He'll hear us, knowing that He cares. We can come with confidence to His throne. But then the other thing that I have here, and I probably should have left this up here, that the Mosaic, by earthly standards, was a whole lot more elaborate. And we see that here. That was a whole lot more elaborate. You had also the tabernacle and the furniture in the tabernacle and all like that we'll discuss later. And I love discussing that with children because there's so many lessons that come out of that sometimes we forget, but children can get those. They can get those if we bring it down to their level. But, there was the Day of Atonement, and that's the time that the Hebrew writer is going to talk about a whole lot from chapter 7 on. But you had all of those sacrifices. And yet, what distinguished the Old Testament high priest from Jesus is that when he went in to offer for the people, he had to first gone in and offered for who? Himself, because he had sin. But what about Jesus? Did he have to offer a sacrifice for himself? No, he had no sin. And so he is that perfect high priest, And of course, we'll learn this in chapter 7, verse 2, also in chapter 8, that the priesthood being changed, there's also a change in the law. And so many people out here, a lot of our friends and neighbors and relatives, especially, I guess, of an older generation, I don't know so much now, but think if you're going to be saved, it's by the 10 Commandments. If it's by the 10 Commandments, then Jesus died in vain. So, and so that old covenant has passed away. And I remember that was one of the big things that had to be preached when I was growing up at gospel meetings and all like that. That was one of the big things, that the old covenant has passed away. And it got to be so much so that people started saying, the churches of Christ don't believe in the Old Testament. And that's what they kept saying. Well, there were some of our young preachers that didn't study a lot that almost bought into that, almost preached it. They didn't really, but they got so close to that you could get that impression. But all this was back, I'm trying to think. Jerry's father passed away in, I think, 1980. It's along in there or something. And he was, and then his father passed away in December and his mother in January. That was a interesting year. And anyway, they were buried in this little community-type cemetery called Mount Zion. Outside of Sulphur Springs, a little country, and there was a little country church there where back generations before, every religious group used that on certain times, for their services. And at any rate, they would have a Memorial Day service, and since Gary was a preacher, and since both his parents were buried there, the officials decided to ask him to come back and speak at that memorial service. And he brought a lesson, as you know, when Gary has the opportunity to expound on God's eternal purpose. That was the lesson, the type that he brought. And, all of these old people, it was really kind of amazing. They would come to us and say, well, I'd always heard the Church of Christ didn't believe in the Old Testament, but you sure showed us that you do, But it's the proper use of the Old Testament. That's the thing, the proper use of the Old Testament, that's important. But we know that that has passed away. Now, I had here two divine qualifications for the high priesthood, and that we see in verses 4 through 6. First of all, you had to be called by God. You had to be called by God. You didn't take it, you didn't decide, somebody from the tribe of Benjamin couldn't say, I'm going to be high priest now. What was one of the problems with Jeroboam up in, when the kingdom divided? He set up those two golden calves, or whatever. But what else did he do about a priesthood?
He went outside Levi, didn't
Jeroboam, the one that he not only changed the place of worship, but he changed the priesthood. He appointed for priests. He decided who would be priest. And he appointed for priests people, from among whoever. Can that happen today? Can we, Paul even warned about heaping to yourselves teachers having itching ears, turned away from the truth. But that was one of the things that Jeroboam did, changing the place of worship and changing the priesthood. And that led people then away from Christ. So I have number one here, the high priesthood must be appointed by God. And Jesus was appointed by God and also appointed with an oath. As you see in verse 6, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And he is quoting there from Psalm 110 verse 4. And I've said this before and y'all probably get tired of hearing me say it, but it was several years ago. That there are only 3 verses in Genesis about Melchizedek. I think it is 2 or 3 verses in Genesis about Melchizedek. And then there's this one verse in Psalm. And then you get to the book of Hebrews and boom, there you see why all of that. If we were just, now Melchizedek is pretty well a household name. If we go over to Africa and there, people sometimes when they become Christians will change their names because they've been named in some tribal way or something. And you don't know how many Melchizedeks we've met over there. That's just an important name in the Bible. And yet, 4 verses in your Old Testament. The average reader that didn't know anything would just bypass that and not even think anything about it. But that shows us some things about the eternal purpose of God. It shows us some things about his foreknowledge and what he was planning to do. And then God did swear with an oath, and it says because he couldn't swear by anybody greater. Men always swear by the greater, but God couldn't swear by anyone greater, so he swore by himself. And he said, you are a priest forever. In fact, that's the way it is stated. Let's see. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So when we get to chapter 7, we'll see that he was also appointed by the power of an endless life. An endless life. But the high priest also had to sympathize with our deepest grief, with our weaknesses. And I've got number 2 there. God desires that men seek him, so he established the priesthood and the high priesthood. We've kind of talked about that earlier under point 1. That particular point could have gone just about anywhere here. But look at that number 3. The high priest must be able to sympathize in deepest grief. And he says here in verses 7 through 9, and let's just look at that, who, he's talking about Jesus, in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. And we might turn to Mark 14. That's the one I have marked here. I've also got Luke 22. Here, the writer is pointing us to that event in Gethsemane. And I think I know the reason I have Mark 14 down here. Mark 14, what did I say, verse 32. Okay. Well, let's start here and let's just read through this. Then they came to a place which was called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Have you ever been troubled and deeply distressed? Mm-hmm. And he was troubled and deeply distressed. And he said to them, "My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." He went a little farther and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." Then he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation." And then he understands the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Have you been in situations like that where the spirit was willing, but the flesh couldn't get out of the chair? Or I think here what he's talking about, the flesh being weak in terms of being sleepy, but also in terms of, as he said, watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. Because when we give in to that, we can enter into temptation. And again he went away and prayed and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he went again a third time, and again he said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hand of sinners. Rise, let us go. See, my betrayer is at hand." I guess it may be Luke's account of this, where it says that sweat as it great drops of blood. Let's see, Luke 22, am I in Luke 22, 39? Let's see. Yes. In Luke 22, verse 43, it says, "Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him." Now, we don't have angels appearing to us, but many times after we pray, do we have that strength to go ahead and enter into whatever difficulty we're facing? In verse 44, "And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground." And that is in fact, when Jan Rhodes was in class and we discussed this back 15 years ago, she explained the medical background of that. But that is a medical thing that can happen. But notice here in verse 7 where it says, "In the days of his flesh, he offered up prayers." He had need. And this is not the only time he prayed, but this is the time that the writer appeals to or reminds us of. And supplications, that implies a helplessness. He felt helpless. Have you ever felt helpless? With vehement or strong cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. Have you prayed with strong crying and tears at times? I have. When my dear little daughter was going through ECT, and Gary was out there, and I was sitting on the floor over Thanksgiving, and I just sat down on the floor and just cried and prayed, and all I could say was help. That's all I could say. And you know what was interesting? In a few minutes the phone rang, and it was sweet little Bethany calling me to see how I was doing and just checking up on me. And that helped, that helped. She knew what was going on, and she wanted to say, I care. There are times in our lives when we care so much about our children, or when we care so much about someone who we are studying with, who we know is lost, or maybe when we're just going through so many stresses. Moms have a lot of stresses at times, don't we? And when we're going through those stresses with our kids, and maybe things are just not right out here economically or whatever, there are times when we feel helpless. There are times when we may be crying and in tears, and we call out to the one who was able to save us. God was able to save Jesus from death right there. Because as we said last time, don't you know that I could call legions of angels? And that's a bunch. I think it was 72,000 is what I figured. That we sing the song, you could have called 10,000. No, it could have called 7 times 10,000. He could have called angels to save him, but he didn't, because he cared for us. But it says he was heard. Yeah, God heard him. Does God always answer our prayers exactly the way the flesh wants them? See, he didn't answer that prayer in the way the flesh wanted, but he answered that prayer in the way Jesus really wanted it answered. Not my will, but your will. I'm hurting like everything. I feel helpless. I don't want to do this, but I know I must do this. And then verse 8. And I used to remember in sermons over and over and over, at verses 8 and 9 were always quoted, but verse 7 wasn't linked to them, and so I never realized until I started studying more for myself that verses 8 and 9 were connected to verse 7. Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things he suffered. He learned obedience by the things he suffered. Do we have to learn obedience sometimes through suffering? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you can think in terms of, my mind just sometimes almost explodes when I think about the one who created this world had to learn to walk, had to learn to negotiate the world, had to learn how to protect himself from a storm. All these things he had to learn. And he did learn them just like you and I learned them. Those things, those physical things, he had to learn because he was confined to a physical body. So can we say that he understands? Yeah. It doesn't mean that he has to go through everything, every single experience that I have had. But what it means is, does he know the depths of grief? Does he know, when he stood at the tomb of Lazarus, and it says he wept there, he knows that. Does he know what does he know what it's like to cry over maybe unfaithful children? What did he do when he looked out at Jerusalem there? Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you, but you wouldn't. So he knows those things, and he cares. That's the thing, he cares. And so he learned obedience through his suffering, and that's what perfected him. That's what perfected him. And so he's the author of eternal salvation to all those who obey him. So do I have an excuse then? Can I say, Lord, this is too hard, I'm not going to do it?
You can say it.
You can say it, yeah, you can say it, but it's...
But aren't you thankful we had somebody to turn to?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That, before I became a Christian, it's just,
Yeah.
I'm just so thankful.
And I want to repeat that for Marcia just said that before she became a Christian, she didn't really have anyone to turn to. And are we thankful that we have someone to turn to who can help? Who can help? And like I say, even when that answer is not necessarily what the flesh wants, we still know that he cares and that he'll see us through that when we do right. Yeah. And you see, I haven't had the experience of that feeling, but I have had the experience of people that I thought really loved me and cared for me, not supporting me. And then if you kind of take that and translate it to well, what if God treated me that way? You know? Then I can see what you're talking about, not maybe quite as broad, because I being blessed with having grown up in the church, and some of you are blessed with that, and some of it's weren't, but that doesn't make any of us better. As I've said over and over and over, I think of this all the time: to whom much is given, of whom much is required, and that keeps, you know, sitting right back here all the time, and I'll have to stop and tell you all this because I was thinking about this on the way over here that I was going to say, and then we got sidetracked with putting this up. But this morning there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and John and I were talking about one that was also in the Atlantic. And anyway, I was talking to Gary some about this one that was in the Wall Street Journal that was about how people feel about churches and so on like that. And after a while, you know, he can take real serious talk from me in particular to a point, and then after a while, he's just kind of got to drift off into his own world, you know. But I was thinking on the way over here of a line from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar: "Young Cassius is dangerous. He thinks too much." And sometimes Sarah can be dangerous. She thinks too much. But I do, just think about these things, maybe more than I should, I don't know. But at any rate, this is, and I've got a question here on number 4, learning obedience through suffering, your thoughts on the concept, and also on 5, how does this and the other suffering that Jesus did perfect him as our high priest? I may have answered all of that, but do you have anything you want to? Oh, we're getting close to the end. I thought I could finish this real fast.
He had to learn how to be a child and obey his parents, even though he knew. Mary told him about his father in heaven and where he came from, but he still had to obey Joseph.
Right. And I've heard someone, I heard a preacher make this point one time, and I thought, yeah, that's pretty good, especially for teenagers. You know, when he went to Jerusalem the first time, you know, and then was there with the teachers of the law, and and that's another thing. They thought he was with them. Can we thought Jesus is with us and he's not be? Yeah. Sometimes we lose him in the crowd. Or as I've said it in regard to teaching the Bible to children in particular, we think Jesus is with us just because we mentioned him once at the beginning, that in the beginning God decided to send Jesus to save us from our sins, and then we don't mention him anymore. And he's all the way through there, but we think he's with us, but we don't see him. And so if he's with us, we need to see him and we need to show him too. But anyway, that's kind of off the subject. But when he came home, what does it say? He was subject to them. And I heard this preacher say the only teenager, because he was just 12 or little, said the only teenager that actually knew more than his parents was subject to them. And And you know, that does tell us, that does give us an example for teens. He was subject to them.
Think about his mother.
Yeah.
How she had to raise him
Yeah.
to know that he was gonna save her.
And it says that Mary kept those things in her heart. She may not, you know, we don't know how much she told him. We don't know exactly when he knew exactly what his mission was and all like that. But we speculate, and there are some hints given in that there at the Passover feast. That's one of the hints that's given. And we can speculate and speculate, but we do know that there was a point, you know, when he was about 30, that the call of God, of his father, you know, of his true father, said, now it's time to lay aside those carpenter's tools. See, he learned a trade just like all the others. Now it's time to lay aside those carpenter's tools and do what you were sent to do. But all those 30 years, we think, boy, you wasted a lot of time. No, all those 30 years were preparation. Preparation, watching people, seeing things, you know, being involved in family. And some people even suggest, since Joseph wasn't mentioned any later, that Joseph may have died and Jesus had to take over as the elder son, you know, to take care of the family until, you know, others came. But we don't know those things. We don't know those things. And since God drew a veil across that, I try to not to speculate too much, because that's all he wanted us to know. And I've read some things where they asked, did Jesus have pimples? Did he have to? I don't care. You know? I know that he learned obedience by the things he suffered. And I know that he had to go through all of the normal development of a child. And that just kind of blows my mind again when I think of the fact that he was creator and suddenly he's confined. The person who could be everywhere at once is now right here. You know, that's different. That's a whole different experience for him. Yes, but the important thing is what's revealed to us about Jesus. That's the important thing. And right here, the struggle that he had in the garden, and I've read some of this stuff too. These real eggheads that are trying to set themselves above the scriptures instead of set themselves beneath the scriptures. Say that when Jesus was in the garden, you know, because he was in tears, because he was in agony and all like that, that actually he was just a blithering idiot at that time, you know, and just, you know, so stressed out he didn't know what he was doing. But that's what happens when you know, you can let your imagination go crazy in the early years of his life, and then you can also, if you don't want to believe, you can let your imagination go crazy and decide on this, and that he hallucinated when he saw that angel. You know, people can come up with all kinds of stuff. But I think it's interesting here, and I'll make this point, and then we'll get to the rest of this next time, I guess. But I think it's interesting here, and I think the point we need to see is that Jesus is fully qualified to be our high priest, and that he does understand. He does understand. And because he does, and we've talked about this before, but maybe especially here in the garden in agony. In the garden in agony. You know, when you're in your 30s, isn't that the time that you feel the most robust, the most, I mean, when you get to your 50s, you start, in your 60s, and your 70s, and I don't know if any of you are 80 or past, but anyway, I take my friend at Wiley, and by the way, if you want that Ladies' Day at Wiley on November 6th would be a really good thing if we could go to it. But at any rate, my friend from Wiley, she just, I think she's 81. I think that's it. Maybe 82. Anyway, she said the other day when I was visiting with her, she said, you know, I did pretty good until I hit 80. And she said, I just really got slowed down. And I'm thinking, I've got 4 years.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I've not accepted it very well.
Well, I think, yeah, I think she didn't accept it very well, and then it seemed like her whole self was just, you know, but I'll let Sylvia try out ages before I get there to see how she goes through them. But, you know, we do need to, but I was thinking that when you're 30, that's when life seems good. When you want to stay around, you know. And with Jesus, there was I read, I think it was James Stalker who said that life was surging through him like any 30-year-old, you know. A 30-year-old is not thinking about death. But he struggled with that and became obedient. And I think that's the most important thing for us to get out of class. I really want us to talk about these things at the end here. And so I want y'all to think about those over the things that we can do to change some of the things. In fact, those of you who have an email address, I may try to send you a copy of this article from the Wall Street Journal, and also I think I can send you, I can probably send you the one Peyton sent me from the Atlantic. You won't agree with all of it, you know, but it does say how culture infects the church and how maybe we have been responding to culture in not the best way. But I'll try to send that to you too, just for you to be thinking about it, because I think what we'll talk about next time is what can we do to make a change up here? What can we do to make things better? And what can we do to keep people from falling away? What can we do to keep people from falling away? And after they fall away, what can we do to help them come back? So be thinking about those things, and I'll let Jeannie lead another song. Probably, it's 11 o'clock. She's got one she wants to teach us.
Well, I really do have a favorite song.
Oh,
And this is it. And you know the words to it. The words of John 3:16. God so loved the world. And you may have heard this song before. I hope some of you have. The only change I would make on the second page over here on the third staff, we're going to eliminate the two measures. And we'll start the second ending right after that. So we'll sing down to the first to the second staff on the second page, where it says DC, and we'll go back to the beginning. And then we'll take the second ending Okay.
I'll just follow you.
God so loved the world, God so loved the world, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not His Son into the world to condemn the world. God sent not His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. God so loved the world, God so loved the world, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
Let's all hang on to this so we can sing it.
Yes, you hang on to them and study them.
Thank you, Judy.
And we'll sing it again.
Okay, I better make a note of this for the night.
There to stop.